The deal had been sealed in complete silence. There was no gold exchanged, no papers signed. Only a nod from the foreman, a tethered horse, and the girl, pushed forward like a sack of unwanted grain. Liza stumbled as her boots caught on the dry earth, the sun blinding her with its harsh light, making the world appear white and barren. Her wrists were bound, and her throat was parched. The men behind her were already turning away, eager to forget the transaction that had just taken place. "Half-breed, keep her in check," one of them muttered. "Won't kill her yet." Liza said nothing. She didn't flinch, merely stared at the man who had bought her. He was taller than she had expected, draped in a buckskin coat that was as dark as the dust around him. His face was unreadable, carved from stillness, a man of Apache descent, though not wild or cruel, just present, watching her as if she wasn't completely broken yet. He didn't speak, only took the rope from her and mounted his horse with a fluid motion, then tugged gently on the reins. She followed not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. They rode for hours under the burning sun, the heat cracking her lips and the silence hanging heavily between them, like a noose tightening around her chest. She expected violence to come at any moment, the next ridge, the next stop, but none came. As dusk fell, they reached a bluff overlooking a narrow canyon, where the smoke of a low fire curled upward into the evening sky. The man dismounted and cut through the ropes binding her wrists with a single stroke of his knife. Without a word, he tossed her a canteen. "Drink," he said, his voice low but calm. She blinked, confused, and asked, "Aren't you going to?" But he didn't answer. He simply turned and led his horse down into the ravine, disappearing into the brush. Liza stood there, free from the ropes but not from fear, the canteen sweating in her hand. This was not how men behaved. Men took, they didn't walk away. Her heart pounded in her chest. The last time someone had looked at her like this without touching her was when she was still living under her mother's roof. That had been years ago. Slowly, she drank from the canteen, taking small sips as she watched the canyon glow faintly in the orange light of the setting sun. Maybe this was the start of something worse, or maybe, just maybe, she had been given to a man who didn't see her as property at all. She didn't trust it yet, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was already dead. She found him again by following the scent of wood smoke and the faint trail left by his boots in the dust. The fire burned low in a pit surrounded by flat stones, its warmth spilling into the silence like an unspoken invitation. The Apache warrior sat on the far side of the fire, cross-legged, sharpening a blade slowly against a wet stone. He didn't look up when she stepped into the circle of light. She hesitated, unsure of what to do next. "Do I sleep here?" she asked, her voice feeling too loud in the stillness. He nodded once, his eyes still fixed on his task. "That side." She moved to the far edge of the firelight and sat down, pulling her knees close to her chest. Her body ached, not from the long ride, but from the months before. The nights without blankets, the hands that left bruises, promises shattered quicker than bottles broken on saloon floors. She waited for him to speak, to demand something from her, but he said nothing. When he finished sharpening the blade, he stood up, rolled a blanket onto the cold earth beside the fire, but on the opposite side, and then lay down, his back to her. His shoulders were rigid, his head slightly tilted, as if he were listening for any sound she might make. She watched him, his breathing slow and controlled, as though he were the one afraid of her. The moon rose high, pale and full, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She flinched, but he didn't move. After a moment, without looking at her, he reached out and nudged something toward her. A second blanket, folded tight. She stared at it, then at him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quiet, uncertain. He didn't answer. Perhaps he didn't hear her, or maybe his silence was the answer. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, its warmth creeping in like a quiet betrayal. She lay down, the weight of the blanket comforting, but it didn't erase the past. She had been owned before, caged before, but never by a man who refused to touch her, even when no one was watching. She woke up slowly, the warmth of sleep receding but not in fear. For the first time in a long while, her dreams weren't haunted by the urge to run. Instead, she found herself dreaming of a fire that remained steady, its flames flickering while someone else kept watch over the dark. When Liza opened her eyes, the sun was already high in the sky, and to her surprise, her hands were free. Not just unbound, but untouched. No ropes, no threats, no sign that anyone was keeping watch. The warrior who had held her captive was gone, leaving only his horse grazing quietly near the canyon wall. Liza sat up slowly, her heart racing. Freedom was a trap she had seen too many times. It was often just a game, a door left ajar to see if the dog would run. But there were no signs of a trap here, no clenched fists, just a half-eaten strip of dried meat beside the embers and a skin of water propped against a stone. Her stomach growled, and though she didn't want to, she found herself eating, scared of the comfort she felt. The silence of the moment stretched on. Half an hour passed before the man returned, carrying a bundle of sage and something wrapped in hide. He glanced at her briefly, then dropped the bundle beside the fire. "You eat?" he asked. She nodded, and without saying more, he started unwrapping the bundle. Inside, he revealed roots, bitter-smelling but clearly edible. She watched his hands as he worked, noting their cleanliness and scars. These weren't the hands of a raider or killer, not like the ones that had pushed her off a wagon weeks ago. "Do you always live like this?" she asked, breaking the silence. He didn't look up from his task. "Better than the places you've seen." Her shoulders tensed, and she retorted, "You don't know where I've been." "I don't need to," he said. "I saw your eyes." Her response was stolen by his words. She took a root from him without thinking, finding it foul but sustaining. She chewed slowly, watching him through narrowed eyes. "What do you want from me?" she asked, trying to understand him. He answered instantly, "Nothing you don't choose." His words stopped her cold. For a moment she had no answer. He stood, picked up the sage, and tossed it onto the fire. The smoke rose in fragrant spirals, sharp and sweet, and for a moment, Liza forgot how to be afraid. She didn't fully understand this man, didn't know if she could trust him, but the idea that she might not have to earn her place through obedience or fear was enough to make something inside her begin to thaw. She wasn't tied anymore, not to a stake or to fear, and that realization became the first real danger she had felt in years. By the fourth day, there was no fear in the silence. It wasn't out of caution, but comfort. Liza had stopped flinching every time his shadow moved near. She no longer watched him from the corners of her eyes like a wild animal waiting for the trap to spring. She still didn't trust him completely, but the heavy weight in her chest had eased, even if only a little. He taught her things she hadn't expected to learn. How to make a fire from moss and a spark rock. How to walk without leaving tracks. How to listen to the trees. And how to pull water from beneath the canyon floor using a woven reed funnel. "Why me?" she asked one evening, breaking the quiet. He paused, looking at her as if the question didn't make sense. "You think I chose this?" he asked. "Didn't you?" she countered. "They gave me to you." "They tried," he said quietly. "But they don't speak for me." Liza narrowed her eyes. "Then why didn't you say no?" He crouched beside the fire, poking at the embers with a stick, and answered, "Because you looked at me like I was a man, not a monster." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't remember that moment, only the fear she had felt. But maybe it had been there, just before her body had remembered all the lessons the world had taught her. She looked away, feeling the weight of his words. "I wasn't trying to give you anything," she whispered. "I know," he replied, and somehow that made everything feel more real. That night, they sat near the fire, side by side. He carved small shapes from bone and wood, mostly animals. She watched, intrigued. "You don't speak much," she observed. "Words lie," he replied. "Hands don't." She glanced at her own hands, still raw, still healing, but now stronger, more steady. "What's your name?" she asked. "They call me Hawk." "Is that what you call yourself?" she asked. He smiled, a brief, genuine smile. No one asks that. I just did. He nodded but didn't answer. In the firelight, she realized something. It didn't matter. He wasn't hiding who he was. He was allowing her to see him, one layer at a time, slowly, willingly. For the first time since she had been taken, Liza took a full breath. Not stolen, not braced, just hers, entirely hers. Then the knife slipped. A brief distraction while she was cutting bark for kindling. The blade cut deep, and blood ran down her palm in an instant. She gasped, dropping the knife before she could even curse. Hawk was there, immediately, not rushing, not shouting. Just there. He knelt beside her, taking her hand gently in both of his and turning it up into the firelight. His grip was firm but tender, thumbs pressing lightly at the base of the cut to slow the bleeding. It's deep, he said in a low, steady voice. You'll need ash to seal it. Ash? She asked, still trying to steady her breath. From last night's fire, he explained. Mixed with water, it will stop the bleeding. Without waiting for her to reply, he tore a strip from his own shirt, poured water into a carved cup, and mixed the ash into a paste. He applied it carefully to the wound. It stung, and she winced, but he paused, looking up at her. Tell me if it's too much, he said. His words were almost absurd in their kindness. No one had ever asked her if it was too much. Not once. It's fine, she whispered, her voice trembling. Once the bleeding stopped, he wrapped the cloth tightly around her hand, knotting it with a precision that felt almost ritualistic. Then he let go and stepped back, as if the touch had cost him something, too. She stared at him, confused. Why do you do this? She asked, her voice uncertain. Do what? Act like I matter, she said, her gaze dropping to the bandage. He tilted his head. You think you don't? Not to the men who gave me away, she said, bitterness rising. They're smaller than you, he replied softly. She blinked, not understanding. Small men can't hold truth, he explained. So they break what threatens them. She stared at the bandage, then at the hands that had tied it, hands that were strong and patient, capable of violence but choosing something else. Are you going to keep me here? She asked, her voice suddenly tense. Like a prisoner? No, he answered, his voice calm. You can leave tomorrow. Or today. Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected that answer. Just like that? She asked. He nodded. I never wanted to own you. She looked down at the cloth, then back at him. Then why haven't I run? He didn't reply and didn't need to, because somewhere between fear and firelight, Liza realized that maybe freedom wasn't always about leaving. Sometimes it was about staying in the one place you least expected to find it. The dream came softly at first. Her mother's voice hummed gently in the kitchen. The scent of cornbread filled the air, and hands brushed back her hair as she fell asleep on worn quilts. Liza smiled. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. But then the humming stopped. The fire sputtered. Her mother's hands grew cold, too cold, pulling her back, whispering, It's not real. Wake up. Liza gasped and sat up quickly, sweat slicking her back despite the cold night air. The canyon was still, the fire now just red coals. Hawk was nowhere near her, as usual, but his blanket lay unmoved across the way, steady as always. She pressed her bandaged hand to her chest. The wound throbbed, not from the pain, but from the memory. From the way her mother had disappeared when the ranch was raided, from how no one had fought to find her. Liza had been traded from one ranch to the next, each time becoming less and less herself, and more lost. But here, in this canyon, wrapped in a blanket she hadn't earned, with food she hadn't begged for, and words she didn't have to fear, something was changing. It wasn't her old self returning, but something new, something with weight. She stood quietly and walked to the edge of the cliff. The moonlight poured silver over the stones, and she looked out at the wild, unclaimed, endless land. It frightened her, but it also thrilled her. Hawk appeared beside her, like a shadow, silent as ever. She joined him without saying a word. He didn't look at her either, but after a moment, she spoke, Do you miss your people? At first, he stayed silent, then responded, I carry them. She was puzzled and asked, Where? With a calm gesture, he placed a hand over his chest. Here, in the silence. Her eyes searched him, trying to understand, a flood of questions rushing in. But one stood out the most. Do I belong here? Without hesitation, his eyes met hers. Do you feel caged? She shook her head. No. Then you're free, he said simply. A tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was the quiet realization of what freedom truly felt like. He reached up, slow and careful, wiping the tear away with the back of his hand. It was the first time he had touched her face, and for the first time she didn't pull away. She didn't need to hide anymore. She wasn't waking up to someone else's truth. This moment, this breath, this skin, it was finally hers. It was near the end of the second week when she spoke again. Her voice soft and hesitant. I want to stay. Hawk didn't raise his head. He was focused on weaving a net from horsehair, each knot precise and deliberate. She watched him, her heart racing, as if she had said something dangerous. I know you said I could leave, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't want to. He didn't answer. He kept tying the knots, his focus on the rhythm, as though it was more important than any answer. Do you want me gone? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. Still no reply. Only the faint sound of twine tightening and the crackle of wind through the dry sage. She took a step closer, her voice stronger this time. You said I could choose. I'm choosing. Doesn't that matter? Finally, he stopped. He let the net fall into his lap and turned his eyes toward her. They were dark, steady, unreadable. It matters, he said after a long pause. But choice doesn't need permission. She blinked, absorbing the weight of his words. So, I can stay? He nodded once. No smile, no grand gesture, just quiet acceptance. To him, it was as simple as a fire going out. But for Liza, it meant everything. No one had ever let her choose without expecting something in return, without a price to pay. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He didn't move away. Will you tell me your real name? She asked softly. Not the one they gave you. He hesitated, then spoke a string of syllables, his name in a language she couldn't quite understand. It sounded like wind moving over stones. She tried to repeat it, clumsy but careful, and he didn't laugh. He just nodded. It means? She asked. Stone that breaks water, he said, his voice almost a whisper. She smiled. And they called you Hawk? Men name what they fear, he said, not what they fail to understand. She rested her head on his shoulder, not seeking comfort, but offering it. He didn't move away. In that silence, Liza understood something crucial. He hadn't answered her with words because he didn't need to. She already knew. She was home, not claimed, not trapped, just home. The net lay forgotten between them. For the first time, she didn't feel the world pulling at her. She wasn't being carried anymore. She was standing on her own. Suddenly, a sound came from behind the ridge, loud and unexpected. It was male laughter, careless and dangerous, the kind that once made her heart race in fear. She froze, her breath caught halfway in her chest. Without a word, she stepped in front of the fire, her arms slightly raised. Not in defense, just instinctively. Hawk appeared beside her like smoke, his bow already in hand, his shoulders tense. They're passing through, he murmured. Trailers. No scent of liquor, no fresh blood on the wind. His calm steadied her more than his words. Still, her body trembled. I don't want to go back, she whispered. You're not going back, he said, his tone firm, not offering comfort but stating a fact. They waited in the shadow of the canyon wall until the voices faded into the distance. Once they were gone, Hawk lowered his bow, and Liza didn't speak. She walked back to the fire and sat, her hands still shaking, but her spine straight. No running, no crying. Not this time. Hawk joined her after a moment and handed her a strip of dried meat. You didn't run, he said. No, she breathed, surprised at herself. I didn't. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's the sound of healing. She stared into the flames. It still feels like fear. It always does until it doesn't, Hawk replied. The fire popped softly, almost as if agreeing with him. Liza chewed slowly, finding rhythm in the motion. Did you ever run? She asked him. Once, he said, his voice distant. A long time ago. From what? She asked, her curiosity piqued. The kind of place that teaches men to hurt what they don't understand. She looked at him then, really looked, understanding more than she ever had before. And did you? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. But Hawk didn't answer right away. Instead, he just sat with her in the silence, and that was enough. He asked, Do you find peace? No, she answered. I built it. The silence between them lingered, but this time it didn't feel empty. Felt earned. They sat together, letting the quiet stretch between them. A comfortable silence that didn't need to be filled. She laughed softly when his net got tangled in her hair by accident, and this time it didn't startle him. He simply smiled. She realized then that her laughter no longer meant danger. It didn't signal that someone would come, take or punish. It was just hers, and it stayed with her like the fire, like the man beside her, like the freedom she hadn't thought was possible without running. The trader arrived, wearing beads, blankets, and brass buttons, his eyes sharp, and his voice smooth with a hint of deceit. He greeted Hawk in broken Apache and then better Spanish, spreading his trinkets across a hide as he smiled widely. Liza stayed at the back of the camp, hidden in the shadows, her hand resting lightly on the knife that Hawk had taught her to keep under her boot. The trader's eyes found her, as they always did. Is she yours? The trader asked Hawk in English. Pretty one, that pale one. She could fetch 3 horses back in Prescott. Liza didn't move. Hawk did, slowly and deliberately, not toward the man but away. He walked past the trader, past the fire, and stood at the edge of the canyon, where the wind carved through the stone, as if time itself had shaped it. The trader chuckled. What, no deal? I thought Apache liked trading. Liza stepped forward then, her voice low and cold. He's not trading me. The man looked surprised. You speak for him? No, she said firmly. I speak for myself. Hawk didn't turn around. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any threat. The trader spat in the dirt, muttered something in Spanish that Liza didn't catch, and packed up his trinkets, riding off without another word. When he was gone, Liza walked to where Hawk stood. He didn't look at her but spoke softly. You didn't need me to answer. I know, she replied, but I needed to say it. He nodded, and they stood together, side by side, in the wind. Not touching, not claiming, just 2 people who had chosen the same place to stand. Thank you, she whispered. For what? Hawk asked. For walking away. He looked at her then, and in his eyes was a quiet strength that had always been there. Not in fists but in restraint. Not in ownership but in trust. You were never mine to give, he said, his voice steady. That's the only kind of freedom that matters. She didn't cry. She had done enough of that in her old life. Instead, she smiled because for the first time, when a man walked away from a deal involving her, he wasn't abandoning her. He was honoring her. And in that moment, the canyon didn't feel like a cage. Felt like a sanctuary. The rains came early that season, washing the canyon walls clean and painting the sage in deeper greens. Liza stood at the edge of the bluff, her arms bare to the drizzle, her hair soaked, her eyes steady. Behind her, the fire crackled, the stew bubbling in the pot that she had seasoned without asking. Hawk sat nearby, sharpening a tool, humming something soft and ancient. They didn't speak much anymore, but not because they were afraid, because they didn't need to. That night, she laid out the old blanket, the one given to her the day Hawk had cut her ropes, and spread it over the new bed of reeds they had woven together. Not his side, not hers, just the place they both returned to. There's no one left to sell me, she said calmly. No one left to trade or silence me. I could leave tomorrow. Walk until the canyon disappears, and the town forgets I ever lived. Hawk looked up, the firelight flickering in his eyes. You could, he said. But I won't. She knelt beside him, reached for his hand, and placed her palm over the old scar running across his wrist. Because here, she said, I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. He didn't smile. He didn't answer. He simply turned his hand so their fingers intertwined. Not held tightly, but resting, chosen, steady. The baby's blanket lay nearby, empty for now but ready. Her body had healed, so had her breath. The nightmares had grown quiet. When she did dream, they were no longer of running, but of planting, of teaching, of hands pressed to her belly and eyes that waited, not demanded. The canyon, once a place of exile, had become something else. Not escape, not hiding, but home. Because freedom, she realized, wasn't the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice. She had been sold like property, but she had stayed, like fire stays in stone. Burning, unclaimed, impossible to hold. Hawk never said he loved her. He never promised anything. But every day he gave her space to be whole. And in that silence, Liza finally heard what love sounded like when it didn't hurt. When the baby came, he would hear it too because his mother had been broken and chosen to stay unbroken. Not because she was kept, but because she was finally completely free.